The friendly lady.
Run. Ronnie.
He's almost going to spill it out in Italian.
Okay, let's rock and roll.
Yep.
You good to go?
Let's go.
So this is really part 3. I know you're coming for the first time, but this is part 3 in the series. And we're going to conclude the series of theoretical and imaginary walls. I shouldn't say really imaginary because that sounds like Disneyland. This is like theoretical scientific exercises. This is like talking physics, quantum physics. But we're not talking science, we're talking halacha. So just like quantum physics is not necessarily something you can actually touch, and sometimes you have things which are theoretical. So this is like a theoretical reality within the framework of halacha. And today we're going to talk about the theoretical angles. So it's going to be a theory within a theory. And what we're trying to do is creatively create a sukkah. Because the sukkah is a halachic reality. It doesn't matter if somebody thinks it's nice or not nice. It doesn't make it a kosher sukkah. It doesn't matter if somebody feels sheltered in it or feels exposed to the elements. What matters is that it's a kosher sukkah. And therefore, the variables, the principles of halacha will reign supreme. In the previous classes, we have discussed various possibilities in which there really isn't a wall, but we theoretically see space as closed. The notion that we talked about primarily was something called gud asik. So just to refresh everybody's memory, we may have a sukkah, which can be very, very high. Maybe it's even 10 amud high. Maybe it's as high as this room. Very tall sukkah. And the walls go up 10 tfachim. It's just about here. And the rest is open. But it's encircled with walls, small walls. Halachically, theoretically, we see the walls sealed all the way up to the top. That's called gud asik. Because once the wall's begun, we can see it theoretically continuing, even though there's no actual wall.
I have a question that remains from last class. We went vertically upwards.
That's called gud asik.
Downwards.
Well, actually, there is a machlekes of the achreinim how gud asik works. The Chazon Ish had a very unusual opinion. He believed that gud asik worked the other way around. His approach to gud asik was that it worked its way down rather than its way up. For the most part, this argument is entirely theoretical and has no practical bearing, because at any rate, the empty space is going to be filled. And whether it's the direction that's from down up or from up down, really in theory makes no difference. The point is that the empty space isn't seen as empty because theoretically it's filled. It shouldn't be hard for us to wrap our heads around this. I mean, the whole notion of an eruv, of creating an enclosure to allow for us to carry in a space which otherwise would be an issue, would be problematic, rabbinically speaking, on Shabbat, is made up of archways that you couldn't hang any doors. You can't hang paper doors, maybe. You're talking an archway, you're talking about a pole, you're talking about a piece of yarn or a wire on top, and yet it serves the purpose. It creates this theoretical enclosure. So in order to further amplify what we discussed previously, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov seems to go to all kinds of unusual lengths to be able to justify a sukkah even though the walls aren't there. He said that the theoretical shelter was something that he recognized and noticed using various halachic principles. And the last thing we were talking about was the possibility of schach, which is the covering of the sukkah that's literally resting on 4 poles. And we talked about the notion that the 4 poles, which don't have any walls at all to speak of, would kind of seal horizontally. Rabbi Yaakov could see the same way you can seal vertically, he could see it as sealing horizontally. The truth is, everybody agrees with this principle. It's only that the Chachamim follow it in a very, very controlled fashion. So from the position of the Chachamim, the majority of sages, not Rabbi Yaakov, who had an exceptionally creative take on the sukkah, we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that says that if you have 2 walls of a sukkah, and then you have a 3rd wall, which is just a tefach is a hand's breadth, it's not very wide, just a tefach. So as long as there's a tzuras HaPesach, as long as there's a lintel on the top that's linking this slender wall to one of the other 2 walls, that's considered to be 3 complete walls. In other words, we talk about this horizontal continuation when we're missing the 3rd wall. In general, a sukkah doesn't need more than 3 walls. It needs 3 walls is perfectly fine. But halacha l'Masechet Sinai tells us that even if the 3rd wall is incomplete, if the 3rd wall is just the beginning of a wall, that's already sufficient. And we would view the rest of the 3rd wall. So, for example, if you had a wall here, a full wall, a proper wall, here on the west side, and you had a proper wall here on the north side, and here on the east side, you had in this corner just a thin wall, just a tefach. But there was a tzuras HaPesach, which means we would have a continuation. So then we would see this 3rd wall as complete, and as such, that would be a sukkah with 3 walls.
You mentioned tefach. Is that the minimum size?
The tefach is the minimum size, and in general you should know that all shiurim, that all sizes, in a variety of ways, but halachic sizes as a rule are halacha l'Masechet Sinai. There are some disputes about certain things. For example, the age of 13. There's a question of whether that follows a learning from a pasuk, as a machlekes, a dispute amongst the Rishonim, or it's also halacha l'Masechet Sinai. But as a rule, whenever we have sizes, like for example, the amount of liquid that's considered to be a serving, which is called a viet, it's like 2.9 ounces, a little less than 3 ounces. We talk about the idea of eating a kazayat, which is the modicum amount, like a serving, which is an ounce of solid food. That's halacha l'Masechet Sinai. So when we talk about space, tefach is the methodology we use, and that's because hands are hands are hands.
And that's the minimum.
The average hands. So 1 tefach is the minimum size. Less than a tefach, it's not considered. It depends for what.
What is
But
the size of a tefach?
This is the size of a tefach. No, because you're a woman. This is the size of a tefach. It has nothing to do with a man or a woman, by the way. It's only that the size of a tefach is the average man's fist. I have a pretty average hand. The average man's fist, that's the size of a tefach.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't get it because that's the size of like your
That's-
the size
that's
of a
the-
wall.
Yeah, that could be the size of a wall. Could you imagine?
So how can you go in the sukkah?
How can you go in the sukkah? The problem is not how you go in. The problem is how you feel like you're in a sukkah. Where's the shelter?
That's the 3rd wall.
But that's the 3rd wall. Right, that's correct. That's only the 3rd wall. And that's halacha l'Masechet Sinai. But Rabbi Yaakov takes this to another level. He says, hey, so when it comes to sukkah, a tefach is a wall. Ah, if a sukkah makes a tefach a wall, let me tell you about a sukkah. And he introduces this sukkah. Last thing we talked about was the sukkah, which has no walls. It's like a chuppah. It's like 4 poles. It just has schach on top.
Minimum a tefach.
We said it has to be a tefach. That's correct. So now we're going to further elaborate on this. And it will be really interesting. We're also going to get introduced to a principle in the laws of Shabbat, which can be understood in a variety of ways, and another possibility of the beginnings of a wall which are seen to be sufficient enough as if the wall is completed. And the difference here is going to be that the concept of tzuras HaPesach, that the notion of completing the wall by virtue of having it look like a doorway is not even going to apply, as we'll see in a
Rabbi,
moment.
when you're referring to tefach, we're talking about a 3-dimensional world. So what does this mean?
We're talking about a 3-dimensional world.
Right,
Well,
but
it depends. I mean, sometimes we're talking about a 3-dimensional world, but sometimes the measurements are in 2 dimensions. Or I should say 1 dimension.
Why?
Why?
What's
It's
the
from
point?
here to here. It's just width. We're not talking about depth. We're talking only about width. This is 1 dimension. The wall needs to be a tefach wide. Something which is a tefach wide.
So it could be this wide if that's a fist.
That's correct. If your 3rd wall would be that wide, it would be considered a wall. That's correct.
So in other words, a post, which is a 4x4 post.
A
is
4x4
walls.
post could be, in theory, a wall, and that's actually what we're talking about here. And you'll see it's very interesting. So the Gemara says like this: Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis learned. Now, whenever we have the word Tanu or Tanya or Did Tanya, this is Aramaic. It means we're talking about a Mishnah. Tanan is a Mishnah. Tanya or Ditanu is a Brisa. A Brisa means a teaching that comes from the same source as the Mishnah, the same genre of the Mishnah, only it wasn't inducted into the formal collection of Mishnayot by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. It was collected in various codicils of the Mishnah, like something called Tosefta. Tosefta de Rabbi Ishia, Tosefta de Rabbi Chia, various other collections. And essentially you have to understand this. The Mishnah was teachings that were written down very early on in our history. Later on, the writings became more and more copious, but these were never public writings. These were private writings for teachers to be able to refer to when they would teach the Torah orally, Torah Sheba'al Peh. What happens at some point is that the Jewish people are under such attack, and the assaults are only increasing, and the rabbis at the time realized that if we didn't create some kind of canon, some kind of formal body, it just wouldn't survive. It wouldn't survive. And so they expounded the verse in Psalm 119, Latzot LaHashem, it's a time to do for God, Heferu Toratecha. We have to cast aside your Torah. In other words, the Torah says, don't do this. But the greatest of the great, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, was able to make a decision, a very faithful decision, that he would commit the Mishnah into a formal body, a collection of a formal body. Now, you could have had, on some halachot, 600,000 versions. 600,000 versions. That means Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had to sift through 600,000 versions, as many as 600,000 versions of a single halacha, to decide which one of those versions he should use. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't he just edit it? Why didn't he just create his own version? Because he didn't do that. Because he believed that what he was handling was sacred. And he didn't take the liberties of editing the Mishnah. He redacted the Mishnah. He took these sacred writings and he said, okay, this is the Mishnah which best expresses the halacha, because its verbiage is so precise and so exact, and from what's included and from what's left out, we'll be able to derive everything.
But redaction itself is editing.
The redaction of the Mishnah was an enormous task.
No, in and by itself, a redaction is editing.
What is reduction?
Redaction
It's like
is not
elimination.
necessarily editing.
Kitzurim. Oh.
Redaction is not necessarily editing. Editing is editing, and redaction could sometimes be collecting, sewing together. So the editing would be in sewing together, but the phrases, the cases, and the rulings were not actually, especially the cases, were not actually written by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That's why the Mishnah doesn't speak in the same voice. It's not a homogeneous document. It was written in different times, different centuries. And some Mishnayot read one way, and some Mishnayot read the other way. There are klalim, there are rules in how to study Mishnah. The rabbis of the Gemara, not only they knew the Mishnah, they knew all the Braisot, they knew all of the other Karasos, all the other versions of the halacha that were valid. So when you read the Babylonian Talmud, for example, sometimes as much as 50% of the material is quotations of other Braisos, and this is how we learn a Mishnah properly. We say, okay, the Mishnah says such, well, I'm going to compare one Braisa or another Braisa or a third Braisa, and by knowing all these Braisas are correct, I'll be able to arrive at the proper understanding of the words of the Mishnah. And this is a prime example of that. So Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis learned in the Braisa, Noatz arbo kundesin ba'aretz. A person drove 4 staves into the ground. Now Rashi says that these arba kundesim, Rashi has something very interesting to say about this. He says, as we're soon going to see, that these are round poles rather than square staves. Round poles. They have a circumference, not parameters, they have a circumference. And what happened is, sikach al gabon. So you took these round poles, as we'll soon see, and then after driving them into the ground, so they became planted firmly, then you built some kind of trellis on top to hold the schach, and you covered the area with schach. Essentially, you have what you'd call in English a cupola, or a chuppah. That's really what it is. So is this a kosher sukkah? It's the same question we just talked about, right? But this is another version. Rabbi Yaakov says, I'll tell you if it's a kosher sukkah. Ro'in, we must view these round poles, kol she'ilu yichakaku, if we were to chisel out, if we were to carve out, v'yechalku, we're able to divide, going in 2 directions, v'yasa behem tefach lekan v'tefach lekan, we could identify a tefach going in either direction, nidunim mishum diyumad. Then we can apply the principle of miyumad. What is miyumad? So miyumad, we're going to see, is a principle, a halachic principle that affects the building of a mechitza for the purposes of the Shabbat laws, of creating a domain on Shabbat. So as you can see in your pictures, in the ArtScroll version, you could see exactly what we're talking about when you could literally carve out that circle so that you might have an angle. Now, Rabbi Yaakov is looking at a circle. He's not looking at an angle. But he says the circle contains an angle. And because the circle contains an angle, so if you'd be able to hew out or carve out an angle, then we could apply a halachic principle called miyumad. And if we have this halachic principle of miyumad established, we have a sukkah. What does that mean? Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Kol she'ilu yichakaku v'yichalku. B'kundesin agulin ka'amar. We speak here about round poles. Round poles. Significant round poles. These are like telephone poles. Like real, like heavy round poles. So Rashi says, Ro'in. We see it theoretically. Kol sheyesh be'ovyon. Any of these poles that contains within its diameter the thickness, kol kach, so much so, she'ilu yichakeku, that if you were to carve this out, v'yintel oivi igulim, you would take out the round circumference. You would carve off the circumference. V'yirabum, you would make it square. So we create a square where there is a circle. It's not hard to understand. A circle is round. You can fit a square into a circle. But the point would be that the 4 points of the parameters would have to be surrounded by the circumference of the circle. And obviously, if a circle is able to encompass a square, then there's a good deal of extra space, because those round spaces are unnecessary. So it's actually added circumference. It's added space onto what would have been a fine square. But he's not trying to create a square. He's trying to create an angle. He says, V'yechalko, you would divide them. V'yesh b'hem tefach lakan v'tefach lakan. So an angle looks like this. Suppose there was circumference. And within that circumference, I came in with an angle. And we could actually carve out these angular, I suppose, staves, angular staves that have 2 directions. So we use a router, I guess, in today's language. Take a router and you router off all the outer, the extra circumference, and you're left with an angle, which is living, proverbially, inside the circle. So Rashi says, if you were to do that, and there's a tefach going in either direction, ula'achar sheyirabu, and after you squared this off, yichalku mibifnim. So the first thing we've been doing, we've been routering off the outer circumference to create a square. But after you finish creating a square, now you're going to router out from inside the square. And what will you router out? So the square is a square. But if I take off the square, take off the area over here, I carve this out, so out of a square I've created an angle. I've created an angle out of a square. So if I took the angle out of a square, I mean, you see the pictures in the art school, shows you perfect pictures. It's not a hard principle. V'yaso oisam ke'ein marzevim shalonu sheyesh lehem shnei defanos. Rashi, who lived in southern France in the, I think, 12th century or 13th century, so it gets rainy, you know, and most roofs, like our roofs, had drain pipes. What they would do in that time, in the early Middle Ages, is they would have these angular drain pipes. It was probably very expensive to create circular drain pipes, and totally unnecessary. So if you had an angle, you had room for the water to run off. So Rashi's giving you an example. It would be, you would create out of a square, think of a 4x4. You take a 4x4, and you basically divide it, and then you carve out enough area to create a duct of sorts. And that's your duct. Your duct is what flows through the angle. So v'yechalku, you divide it. V'yesh b'hem tefach lakan or tefach lakan or la'acha sheyirabum. After you would do this job of, so to speak, creating the square, yechalku mibifnim, you divide it from the inside. V'yasa esim keim marzevim shalanu, you make it like a drain pipe. Sheyesh lehem shtei defanos, those drain pipes are angular with 2 walls. Sheimatem zoik van echad midfanaseh. Now, if you take one of these angles and you drive it into the ground, you set it up in a vertical way. So then it has a certain amount of space that's heading in either direction. And the sheni is mitzaf and ledarim. The first is from mizrach to ma'ariv. What does that mean? It's from mizrach to ma'ariv. So this is
From
this.
east to west,
Here's
from one,
exactly.
Right.
Here's
Right.
mizrach,
Right to left.
and here's ma'ariv. So if you have a piece of wall going this way, it's going from mizrach to ma'ariv. And the other part of the angle is going from here's darom, here's south, here's tzafon. So the other set of angle is going from tzafon to darom. It's basically a little bit of a circular language to just describe an angle. That's really what it is. But Rashi didn't draw pictures.
No, he wanted to point out a 90-degree angle here.
Yes, that is correct, Ami. He wanted to describe a 90-degree angle precisely.
Exactly.
Very good. Anyway, by giving opposite directions, from east to west and south to north, he gave you the contours of a perfect 90-degree angle. Very good. Now, what happens is, these are actually the staves. We're looking at the staves in this fashion. So if you have enough within the circle, nidon mishum diyumad, then we might judge it, or like rule, that this would see within it of the principle of miyumad. What does that mean? Oisa ata dona lahachsher, you could then bring a ruling that would make this appropriate, suitable. And this is kedin sha'amru chachamim, like the rule that the chachamim said, le'inyan pasei beyares be'ervin. So there's a principle of the Gemara that talks to us about having a cistern. Now, I have to tell you that what we're about to learn is not something you should try at home, because this was only permitted by the chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, and only for the purpose of oile regel, for those who are coming to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is a relatively small city, relatively. But even if it was a very large city, when the entire nation would mass into Jerusalem 3 times a year, the city infrastructure was overwhelmed. This could be a real problem. So what did they do? And one of the things you really need is water. And they didn't have running water in those days. So Yerushalayim always had copious cisterns. There were many, many cisterns. And during the winter, they would create these aqueducts that would gather the water, and the water was then kept in many underground cisterns. If you go to the Kotel tunnels, you see a perfect example of that. And during the summer, the water would be there. They would keep it in a way that allowed for a minimum of evaporation. It was very cool, very dark, very covered. Sunlight didn't get there, very little evaporation. And what would happen is that this is the way people would have the water they needed. And then the rainy season would come again and fill up the cisterns. So some of these cisterns were in public places. And here we have a problem. If a cistern's in a public place, when it's Yom Tov, it's not a problem, because you're allowed to carry in Yom Tov from a public domain to a private domain. But when you have a public domain and it's Shabbat, you have an issue. Now specifically, this was about the animals of the people. The animals once upon a time were not your best friend. The animal was used for industrial, practical purposes. People had pack animals, mules, donkeys, animals that they used to travel, horses, perhaps cows, and they used them to transport things. And the animals have to drink. But you have to draw water for the animal. Now here's a principle that's you need to know, very important principle. On Shabbat, we're not permitted to take things from one domain to the other. This is called the Rishuyot v'Shabbat, domains. So the domain that everybody's familiar with is what's called a public thoroughfare, a public domain, known in Hebrew as Rishut Harabim. And because everybody has their own private space, for example, if you come too close to somebody, it's called invading their private space. It could be threatening, menacing. You're supposed to leave space, leave people their private space. Otherwise, you're invading somebody. It could be an intimate thing, it could be an uncomfortable thing. Don't invade my private space. How much is private space in an area where people aren't crowded? A private space is as much as a person would be able to just lay down and kind of like move his hands and feet. How much is that? So if we say that the average man is 6 feet tall, which is 4 amot, and the wingspan, if you will, or the handspan is basically in a normal person equal to a person's height. So if you're 4 amot high, you could also be 4 amot wide, and your legs will stretch out the way. That's called your private space. So to carry something outside of your private space is seen as if you're carrying it outside of a domain. Every domain, you can carry something in your immediate domain, that is your private space. So in a public domain, you can't carry something outside of 36 square feet. 36 square feet is the maximum area you can move things around in a public domain. Then we have something called a private domain, Rishus HaYachid. In a private domain, one is allowed to carry as much as they please. However, you cannot take something, transport something from a private domain into a public domain, and vice versa. Now, What makes a public domain is actually a great source of contention. How wide does the thoroughfare have to be? How much traffic, pedestrian traffic or otherwise, on a regular basis is part of the discussion. There's a dispute between the Rishonim, and this is a discussion that's beyond this class. But I want to talk to you about what makes a
Pick it up for Hanukkah.
maybe. I want to talk to you about what makes a private domain. Does a private domain have to be a house? No. A private domain is an area which is sequestered or set aside in a unique fashion. Obviously, a house is a private domain. It goes without saying. Obviously, a backyard is a private domain. Well, really what's required is a demarcation of something that is 10 tefachim high. 10 tefachim high makes it a private domain. So if it's a tefach and a tefach and it's 10 tefachim high, it's a private domain.
1 tefach by 1 tefach and 10 high
Private
is
domain.
private domain.
Private domain.
So 1 pole.
A
would
pole
be
going up
private
could be a
domain.
private domain. That's correct. That's correct.
But we just talked about one's private space.
Yes,
Six
that's
by six.
that's when there are no
How can
walls.
it be a private
There's no
domain?
parameter. The point, there's no
You don't
parameter
fit
over there.
into 4 by
Obviously, this is not only about where a person could live. Private domain, a PO box is also a private domain. Doesn't need to have 36 square feet.
So you don't
Or it doesn't
necessarily
qual-
have to fit in it.
You don't have to
Anything
fit
of
into a
yours
private
has to
domain.
go in.
That is correct. Like if you had on the wall of a Rashut Harabim, if you had something which is in a crevice, that could also be considered a private domain. That becomes a problem. Now these 10 tefachim high, these 10 tefachim can either be a platform, or it can be an indentation. So if you have a platform in a public domain, that's considered a Rashut B'fnei Atzmo. Rashut B'fnei Atzmo means a domain unto itself. And I'll give you a very interesting detail that I'm sure you noticed, but I'll explain it to you why. You go to some of the very old shuls, especially like in northern Israel, and you'll notice that the Torah is always being read in some kind of weird-looking platform. They're very small, the shuls, they're not large synagogues, and they have this little like platform, rickety steps that you go up, and it's got a wall around it. You ever wonder why? So the answer really is very simple. If the Torah is being read right here on the same level, when the Torah is being read, you're required to stand. The only reason we're able to be seated when the Torah is being read is if the Torah reading is taking place in a Reshut B'fnei Atzmo, in a domain unto itself. Therefore, if you look at our bima downstairs, the walls, some of it is wood and some of it is wrought iron, but the walls are 10 tefachim. So it's a bima, but it's not 10 tefachim high. But the walls completed to be 10 tefachim, so it's a reshut b'fnei atzmo, so one is permitted to actually sit, according to most opinions, during the reading of the Torah. There are various reasons why we would make a private domain. Let's stay on the subject here. A platform is a private domain. How about an indentation, a ditch, a cistern in the ground? If it's 10 tefachim deep, it's also a private domain. Now the water is in the cistern. To take the water out of the cistern is to be taking it out of a private domain. To take the water out of the cistern, to bring it to the trough so the animal can drink, the animal's in a public domain. If the water is coming from a private domain and is going to a public domain, Houston, we have a problem. Or I should say Jerusalem, we have a problem. This is an issue. What should we do? What should we do? So you'll say, I have a solution. I have a solution. Why don't you build structures around all the cisterns? Well, it's a very impractical solution because animals have to get in and out. This is the thoroughfare of the ancient world, where animals were regular traffic, number one. Number two, it also becomes very onerous to build these structures. You have to build structures, take them down after.
So you have demarcation.
So the
poles.
Chachamim made a halacha that said you have to have demarcation corners. And the demarcation corners were angles. There were 4 angles placed in a certain parameter, in a certain distance outside the cistern. And so what was inside these 4 angles was considered to be Reshus HaYachid, a private domain. Now it's not exactly a Reshus HaYachid, certainly not rabbinically, but the rabbi suspended some of the stringencies that they had employed as a rule for Shabbos. They suspended those stringencies because of the need. The need that we have a mitzvah to fulfill, Aliyah L'Regel, to come to Yerushalayim. And in order to come to Yerushalayim in a healthy and successful way, we needed to make sure that the animals would get proper hydration. So they used this principle, and this principle is called miyumad. That's what the principle is called. So the yumad, these angular posts, which were on the outside of the cistern, were seen as having a completed wall. Now, if you would build around the cistern, if you would build a fence of 10 tfachim, it would certainly be a private domain. It doesn't have to be a whole building. It would be a private domain, but then you would have an issue. You'd have to build doors that could open and close, and who knows where they would swing. Animals have to go in and animals have to go out. It's very complicated. So instead, we just had these yumads, these diyumads, and these diyumads were like basically demarcation areas. So, and it was open on four sides. So the animal would be let in, and the animal could drink, and they could go out on any side.
Is there a limitation or a minimum for height?
Yes, there is a minimum for height. It has to be 10 tvachim. There's also a minimum for depth. It's an amma.
Not
An
a
amma, not a tefach. And this is a source of dispute exactly how that works. But for Shabbos, we need an amma, not a tefach. So, of course, you could already be asking me a question. We want to say that the principle of diyumad should apply here. But one second. And Rabbi Yaakov would say, Vim lav, going back to our round pole, if you couldn't carve out an angle, which would be a tefach going in one direction and a tefach going the other direction, 90-degree angle, so then you can't. Then ain't dunim, but then we can't look at it or evaluate or rule it as miyumad. Now, of course, you're thinking, what do you mean? The din of miyumad requires an amma, not a tefach.
That's why I asked
You're
the
right.
question.
You're right. So the Gemara continues and says, Shahoya Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov was of the opinion, listen carefully, Di miyumadi sukkah tefach, that the principle of miyumad for a sukkah would be sufficient with a tefach.
So that's an exception.
It would be accepted from Shabbos. Shabbos requires an amma. The sukkah requires a tefach. The Chachamim Eimrim? No. Chachamim said, sure, we can use this principle of an angular space being filled, but that's only when we have sheyiu shtayin kil choson. That's only when we have two full walls. The third wall can be a tefach. That's when we can use a tefach principle. But to fill all the walls with tefach principles, or to try to create an imaginary miyumad, that the Chachamim would not agree, and that's why they say that this would not be sufficient. It would not satisfy the requirements of a sukkah. Only the shlishis would be afilu tefach, even a tefach wide. Now, it has to be understood. Let's take a look in Rashi first. Rashi says, Shahoya Rabbi Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Yaakov used to say, miyumad of sukkah, dayoy betefach. The miyumad, let's, for lack of better terminology, because it's really, miyumad is a halachic term.
What is miyumad?
Miyumad is a halachic term.
Ah,
But we're going to call it an angle. Okay? A theoretical 90-degree angle. A theoretical, angular kind of demarcation. But it's not, a miyumad is not what it is. Miyumad is a halachic principle. The principle of miyumad requires such an angular device, if you will.
That's the parameter for miyumad.
Right,
basically.
right. But when you have parameters like that, it's called halachic principle of miyumad. So Rabbi Yaakov says that you need to have a tefach. And Rashi says, V'loi kishal pasei bi'eros. Not like the pasei of the be'er, which the be'er, the cistern, needs to have shahut srichum Amalekan va'amalekan. They required an amma in either direction. Va'al korchech had Rabbi Yaakov, this business of Rabbi Yaakov, the Omar yechoikeku v'yachalku, that they should hew out and then divide be'igulin in the circle ka'amor. The ibimirubayin le'amar elo yechalku. Because if these were 4x4s, if these were square staves, Rabbi Yaakov's verbiage would have been Yechalku, take it and divide it. But he doesn't say that. He also says Yechoikeku. So Yechoikeku means to shave off the outer circumference to create the angle. And that's how Rashi proves to you that these pillars would have to be round pillars, or could even be round pillars. The Hachi Amrinan Lahu Be'erevin, that's what we say in the Gemara in Erevin. Now, let me just talk about Rabbi Yaakov's opinion here for a minute. The Chiddush of Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov is saying a number of remarkable things. First of all, he's of the opinion that we could apply the principle of miyumad with only a tefach. Why would Rabbi Yaakov say that? You're taking a halacha of miyumad, which needs an amma, and say, oh yeah, it needs an amma. Here is good enough a tefach. That sounds ridiculous. So Rabbi Yaakov's logic is not exactly faulty. Rabbi Yaakov says, we have halacha l'Moshe Sinai that when it comes for a wall of a sukkah, tells us what do we need? A tefach. The Chachamim don't disagree with that. The Chachamim agree. It's just they say you need 2 walls and a tefach. But the Chachamim agree. In principle, Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim are not arguing. In theory, they're not arguing. In practice, in theory, they're arguing. In other words, like this. They're not saying that a tefach isn't a wall. And they're not saying that you cannot see sometimes a tefach being theoretically extended. That's in a qualified manner. Yes, there is such a principle, but it's not the principle of miyumad. That's the principle of a real 2 walls. Like, let's say we have a real wall here on the west, a real wall here on the north. Then on the east you could have a small piece of a wall, a tefach. But Rabbi Yaakov says, no, I got an angle here, and it's a tefach, and an angle here, it's a tefach, and the whole thing is seen as if it would work, like for the laws of Shabbos. But this is the major dispute. Rabbi Yaakov says a tefach, that's all you need. The Chacham said, no. The tefach is right, but that's only when you have 2 walls. It can complete the 3rd wall. It cannot be the basis of a sukkah in and of itself.
Now, those 2 walls, can they be constructed of a good asik?
Yes, they could be good asik, because a good asik is considered to be fully valid halachically, and nobody disagrees with that.
What is asik?
Good asik means when you have a wall that's 10 tefachim high, and then there's empty space. So we say, look, when you have a window do you say you don't have walls because you have a window? And what if you have all windows? Okay, so you have a lot of windows. It doesn't take away from the wall. Principally, there's still a wall in place. I mean, the rain might get in, but then again, the rain gets in from the roof anyway. So it's considered to be a valid, a binding halachic wall.
So two full good asik walls, plus the tefach.
Yes,
for the
that would be
3rd
sufficient.
wall is
Yes.
sufficient.
Now, with regard to the difference between Shabbos, the laws of Shabbat that require the miyumad of an amma, and the laws of Sukkah, which Rabbi Yaakov theorizes would require only a tefach, like why do we have the difference between the amma and the tefach? So, according to the Tosfos, the reason is that when it came to Shabbat, the sages were very stringent. They said, we know there's a principle of miyumad, however, this to begin with is really it's a weak situation, and we want to strengthen the laws of Shabbat. Shabbat's very important, and therefore we're going to require a full amma, which is 18 inches, or up to 24 inches, but at least 18 inches on either side on the angle for the 90-degree angle. And therefore, from the words of the Tosfos, one could argue that in theory, biblically speaking, a tefach would work too. Because the Torah itself, biblically, identifies a tefach as being already a wall. And it's as if to say like this. The Torah itself says all you need is a tefach. That's all you need. The Chachamim expanded the tefach when it came to Shabbat because they wanted to be more stringent with regard to Shabbat. But in principle, the Sukkah's tefach would even work for Shabbos, in theory.
So essentially we're talking about a siyag here?
We're talking like a siyag. Yeah. But that's the opinion of the Tosfos. But there's another version of commentary from this era, which is called the Tosfos de Rabbeinu Peretz. And in Tosfos de Rabbeinu Peretz it says that on Shabbat you need actual mechitzot. On Shabbat you require actual demarcation because you're trying to create a private domain. And therefore, because you need actual demarcation, that you would need to have, at least he says, four tfachim. Most times amma is 6 tfachim. So he says at least most of an amma. And the Chachamim extended it to an amma. However, Rabbeinu Peretz says by the Sukkah, we have a special exception. Special exception that a tefach alone could work. So you see we have a difference in the Rishonim, how we understand the Sukkah. Is the Sukkah an exception, or is the Sukkah the principle and Shabbat is the exception? That's where they extended it in a broader way. Now, the question is this now. Would the Chachamim in theory agree with Rabbi Yaakov if there actually was angles? Would they agree with Rabbi Yaakov? What if there would be miyumad? Rabbi Yaakov said there's a round pole, but the round pole, if you look at it, you could see the miyumad, you could see angles in there. They said about Michelangelo, they once asked him about a particular sculpture that he made. He said, I looked at this block of marble and I saw an angel trying to escape, so I set him free. Right? Rabbi Yaakov is very creative. He looked at a round pole and he sees an angle there. He sees an angle. So, with the Chachamim, clearly don't agree with Rabbi Yaakov. They say, what do you mean? You see an angle. It's a round pole. There is no angle there. But what if there would be an angle? Would that be good enough? So this itself is a dispute. Is Rabbi Yaakov's opinion so extreme that A, he uses miyumad, and B, he uses even a round pole? Or maybe the Chachamim would agree to miyumad. It seems pretty clear that ultimately from the words of Chacham that miyumad would not work. It's a special exception by Shabbat. It would not work by the Sukkah. Even if it would have the tefach, it still would not work. But anyway, what we can understand is now the halacha. The Mishnah talked to us about 4 poles and putting schach on top. We say, well, come on, 4 poles and schach on top. What kind of, that's like chuppah, that's not a sukkah. So now we understand that theoretically, Rabbi Yaakov says, no, it actually is a sukkah. You could actually see the walls. You look at it right, you could see the walls. And because...
If you were Michelangelo.
Right, if you're Michelangelo, he's very, very creative, right? So according to the Chachamim, you would have to have 7 tefachim, because 7 tefachim is the minimum amount for a wall. That's the wall of a sukkah. And you only have the tefach with the 3rd wall. But Rabbi Yaakov would argue, no, a tefach is all you need. The rest, the 7 tefachim, as long as you have a tefach, that's already good enough. That's actually the dispute. And this is the question, would the Chachamim agree of the ilu yechakuku v'yachleiku? So the Torah maintains that the Chachamim disagreed with everything Rabbi Yaakov was saying. And Rabbi Yaakov's opinion is really very creative. He uses enormous amount of creativity to be able to create these theoretical walls to create the kosher sukkah. And Rabbi Yaakov wants to be happy. He says, it can be extenuating circumstances.
But we don't go by him.
We don't go by him. Soldiers are on the front. It's Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur War. They're stationed up in pillbox in Syria. They want to be in a sukkah. So build a whole wall. Big shot. These poor guys are there risking their lives, defending the land, and you're lecturing to them. So they say, we want to look for leniency. So Rabbi Yaakov said, no problem. Take 4 poles, you got a sukkah. Chacham said, it's not going to work. You could take 2 walls and a pole. You have to have a tefach. But that now you're pushing it. But at any rate, we could understand the concept, the principle of how this works out to be, that the Chachamim say the Torah's special halacha about a tefach is only to create a 3rd wall, because you need 3 walls. So once you have 2, the 3rd wall can be created. According to Rabbi Yaakov, all the walls can rely on the special halacha l'Moshe Sinai to create what we would call that full kosher enclosure. And the bottom line really is this. We're speaking about things that are somewhat theoretical. Right? We're imagining these walls to some degree. But on some level, this is as real as quantum physics. This is halachic theory, and if halachic theory works, if there's a principle like this, whether it's miyumad or whether it's gudasik, whatever else it might be, if the halachic principle is in place, well then in that case, it's considered to be halachically binding. I mean, after all, what are we trying to create? A shelter? Not necessarily. By whose definition do we use for what is a shelter? We use halacha. That's the question. Does this halachically satisfy the requirements? And if it does, so you can creatively use creativity.
Not for a shelter, for a sukkah.
For a sukkah, exactly. It's not a shelter. It's for what are the requirements of a sukkah. This becomes the question. And this is, like I said, part 3. With this, we kind of now understand Rabbi Yaakov's opinion, the Chachamim's opinion. The truth is that if you learn this Gemara, and you go through these 3 classes, right? Yaakov, the Chachamim, you walk away with a solid understanding of the principle of sukkah, the dispute, the different ideas behind it, and the ultimate halacha of how 2 walls and a bit can create a sukkah. And I will share this with you. The halacha, of course, is you need 2 walls and a bit. There's a Torah from the Arizal who says that when we sit in the sukkah, we're sitting in Hashem's embrace. It's Hashem's embrace. So he says, how do you embrace somebody? With a hand. He says, 1 wall, 2 walls, and a tefach. So the sukkah is Hashem's embrace. And ultimately, Rabbi Yaakov, he sent those those emojis. You know the emoji that looks like this?
Oh, you had an iPhone.
It's a hug. He had an iPhone. He said, that's a hug. He gave a theoretical hug. But the Chacham said, no, we need an actual hug. We actually need to be surrounded by walls of the sukkah, even if we get just a tefach. And when we're surrounded by bechibuk, with the hug of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when sitting at Hashem's embrace, that's when we have not only a happy, but a kosher sukkah. May Hashem help us that the sukkahs, David Hanefelas, should rise again with the coming of Mashiach, and we should all be sitting in happy and kosher sukkahs in Yerushalayim, in HaKodesh, B'mheira, U'b'yameinu, Amen.
Amen.
Toda Rabba.
Bruchem Tiyah.